We're supposed to start the next thing is learning the Gemara on the subject of Mashiach, which is a tractate of Sanhedrin. And the only thing is that because today, tonight, and Sundays is a very special day in the Hasidic calendar, Tes Kislev, Yud Kislev, and half the class is not here. So I figured I'd rather start the Gemara next time around. And today we'll talk about the significance of this day. So it's basically 2 days. Starting tonight is the 9th of Kislev, and Sunday is the 10th of Kislev. What happened, both are related to the Mittel Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad. The Tes Kislev is the day that he passed. It's also the day that he was born, on the same day. And we know that a day of passing is a very significant day in Halacha. And also the birthday is a very significant day. And here both things happen on the same day. Yud Kislev is about the Alter Rebbe. The Mittel Rebbe was arrested, and then he was freed from jail on this day. So I want to give over a little bit of the history about the Mittel Rebbe's birth, the Mittel Rebbe's passing, and about the story of how he was arrested and how he was freed from jail. Just one question that everybody has of why such a strange name, the Middle Rebbe. Why did they use that name? What? He was in the middle, but every Rebbe is in the middle between two Rebbes. So the reason is because the Mittel Rebbe passed away quite young. He was 54 years old. And the length of time that he was a Rebbe was pretty short. Let me figure it out for a second. The Alter Rebbe passed away Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel, which would be 1912. No, what kind of 19? 1812. Alter Rebbe passed away in 1812. And the Mittel Rebbe was the Rebbe right away. How long was he Rebbe? Until Tov Kuf Pei Ches, which is 1827. So that's about 14 years altogether. Yeah.
What year was the Mittel Rebbe born?
What year was he born? Tov, in the Hebrew, it's Tov Kuf Lamed Dalet. So that's 1873. 1873. So being that he was a Rebbe for 14 years, which is the least of all the Rebbes, so there were a lot of Hasidim that were still Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe, right? So when they said the word Rebbe, it was always the Alter Rebbe. Now there was a new Rebbe, and he was only Rebbe for 14 years, so they also became Hasidim of the third Rebbe. Most Hasidim didn't have that dilemma so much. But because it was such a short time, they were Hasidim of 3 Rebbes. So that's why they refer to him as the third Rebbe was called the Rebbe. When they said the first Rebbe was called the Alter Rebbe. In Yiddish, Alter could mean old, it could also mean previous. And this Rebbe was the middle one. There was no other way of referring to it because it was 3 different people. So they used that, they referred to it as that. So I'm just preparing those who are in other class. I'm going to repeat a lot of things from that class, but some things will be a little bit new, like what I just explained now about the Mittel Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe was a chassid of the Maggid Mizrich, one of the students, but in reality he was also not just one of the students, but in a certain sense one of the most chosen students of the Maggid Mizrich. And before his passing, he was, even though the Maggid had like 120 students who were all big tzaddikim, he had thousands of followers, but he had about 120 students who were very big tzaddikim. And later they became Hasidic leaders and Hasidic masters, but Alter Rebbe was very close to him. And he used the term that Alter Rebbe was like a child to me, obviously more than the other ones. And the Alter Rebbe was near his bedside those days before his passing. So it was the Shabbos before he passed away that the Alter Rebbe, that the Mitzvah Rebbe, the Maggid Mezrich told the Alter Rebbe he asked for a bracha for a son. He was married for 14 years, had daughters. The Alter Rebbe had 3 daughters, but he had no sons. And he told him that next year you're going to have a son. And he said to him, and you should name him after me. Even though he was alive at the time, but he was sick, clearly saying openly that he's not going to be here by that time, and he should name me after him. So the Mitzvah Rebbe's name is Duber, and his name is Duber is actually a Yiddish name. The word dove in Hebrew means a bear, and in Yiddish, bear is the same word as in English, a bear. So he was named Duber, and that was the name of the Mitzvah Rebbe as well. We have one other Rebbe with that name, yes?
So the Alter Rebbe was Duber or the Maggid?
The Maggid was Duber, and the Mitzvah Rebbe was named after him, so he was also Duber. So the Mitzvah Rebbe, he became the successor of the Alter Rebbe. A lot of people wonder about this, and we're definitely going to have a class about it. Like, what is this thing that always sticks to the family? Is that, like, what's the basis for that? We're talking about not just leadership, we're talking about tzaddikim, but this is actually a halacha, and there's a pasuk in the Torah where the Torah says, it's a reference to a king, that the king who passes, the kingdom should go over to his son, if he is worthy. If he's not, then you look elsewhere, which means, in a certain sense, it's like inheritance. However, how can it be inheritance if you're talking about being a tzaddik? So it means we have to investigate. If his son is a tzaddik like the father, and he's worthy of this position of leadership, both in terms of his Torah knowledge and fear of God, then he's the first one that should be chosen. If not, then we look for someone else. So, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu, he had sons, but because they weren't on the level that they were worthy of this position, it wasn't his son that became the successor. It was Yoshua, which was one of his students. On the other hand, we find another instance in the times of Gemara, there was a great sage by the name of Hillel. His son became a successor, and his son's son became his successor, and his son's son became his successor. It went that way for 16 generations, which means because they were all worthy and they were tzaddikim, so it naturally went either to a son, and if there was no son or the son wasn't worthy, it went to a son-in-law, or sometimes to a brother and things like that. So the Mitzvah Rebbe was the Alter Rebbe's oldest son, and he became the Rebbe after the Alter Rebbe. And the Mitzvah Rebbe's way of teaching Hasidus was different. It was the same as the Alter Rebbe, but progressing. In other words, each generation of Rebbe of Chabad continued teaching Hasidus, but in each generation it became more in quantity and also in, if you can use the word, in quality. What does that mean? It means that very often in the Chasichas they compare the Alter Rebbe and the Mitzvah Rebbe to Chochmah and Bina, which basically means that when you talk about the intellect, there's 2 faculties in the brain. One is called Chochmah, one is called Bina. And the difference is Chochmah is the essence of the concept, and Bina is the elaboration on the concept. Let's say, you're doing something in math or in science, there's a certain, let's say, scientific theory, and based on that theory, you can do let's say, a person who invented an airplane. So there's a theory that it's based on, but then there are many details to it. So the theory, which is the source of everything, that's the Chochmah. And then all the details of application of that theory, that's the Bina. So it says that and one of the examples that are given is like a river and a wellspring. If you ever saw a wellspring, you saw a picture of a wellspring, it's a stream of water that comes out of the ground, that's all. But many rivers are actually a result of a wellspring. There's a wellspring coming out of the ground, the water flows, and eventually it flows for miles. So you have a long river that's many miles long, and who knows how wide, but it all came from this sort of one stream of water coming out of the ground. So the stream of water is like the Chokhmah, and the wellspring and the details, the river, which is so long and so wide, that's the Bina. So the Alter Rebbe is always compared to the wellspring and the Mitzvah Rebbe to the Bina. Practically, what does it mean? That the Alter Rebbe, for example, would say something in a mimer, and then the Mitzvah Rebbe wrote a mimer to explain that. The one that explained the Alter Rebbe's mimer, if the Alter Rebbe's mimer was 2 pages, the Mitzvah Rebbe's was 30 pages. And when he said a mimer, sometimes it was for hours. And his Chassidim were able to concentrate and listen to a mimer that went on for 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. There's a sikh of the Friedrich Rebbe that he asked one of his relatives if he ever heard what was the longest ever that happened that he said Chassidus. So he said 18 hours. Probably with some breaks in the middle. But in one Shabbos, he said Chassidus for 18 hours. So the Mitzvah Rebbe really spread Chassidus in that way. And also during his lifetime, during his leadership, he spread Chassidus so much that tens of thousands of people became Chassidim. So one of the stories about the Mitzvah Rebbe was that after the Alter Rebbe passed, there was a lot of, in those days, there was tremendous opposition to Chassidus out of lack of knowledge and misinformation. And a lot of it was done intentional, some of it was done just by non-intentional, but there was definitely tremendous opposition against Chassidus. And as a result of that, when the Alter Rebbe passed away, there was a decision made by this committee who was fighting Chassidus that now is the time to do everything we can to sort of launch a campaign to crush the Chassidic movement. Why do they think so? Because the Alter Rebbe, first of all, he was the strongest person amongst all the Chassidic masters that was very sort of aggressive in spreading Chassidus more than anyone else. And secondly, the Alter Rebbe was a very dynamic person. And the Mitzvah Rebbe was always known as more of a softer person. And not such a loud person, not such a strong person. Even physically, he had a heart condition. He had a condition with his lungs. The Alter Rebbe was physically very strong. They say the Alter Rebbe was able to pick up an entire shas and hold it in one hand. You know what a shas is? It's about 20 books, volumes. And years ago, the covers were made out of wood yet. You know, it was very heavy. The Mitzvah Rebbe was weak physically. He had a heart condition, he had a lung condition. They felt this is the time. And therefore, they secretly publicized that we have to now launch a campaign, go to these Chassidim and try to show them that they're in the wrong place and it's a big mistake and it's all part of the cult, etc., etc. What did the Mitzvah Rebbe do? The Mitzvah Rebbe told his Chassidim that he's giving them 2 orders that they have to follow. One was, being that he heard about this plan, that he didn't want the Hasidim and their opponents to even meet and have to get into dialogues and arguments, because when you have a dialogue with someone, there's 2 possibilities. One possibility is the person's having a dialogue because they're sincerely interested in verifying what's true, what's not true. There's another possibility, the person's having a dialogue, they're not interested in anything, they just want things to be their way, and therefore they won't even hear what you're saying, and it's a waste of time to have a dialogue with such a person. You're just wasting your time, wasting your energy, and if anything, you're only making that person stronger by doing that. So therefore, being that he knew their intention was only to sort of engage the Hasidim in dialogue in order to bring them down, he told the Hasidim not to have any dialogues with the people who are against them, not to have any discussions with them, and to avoid even going to daven in their shuls. So the Hasidim had to make their own shul, have their own minyan, not because he wanted division, God forbid, because that's on the contrary. He knew that this will prevent division and prevent fighting and arguments by just doing your own thing. And the second thing was that he ordered the Hasidim that they should all, they have they're charged with a mission that when they come back from the city of Lubavitch, when they hear a mimer from the Rebbe, they should, wherever they go, they should stop off in that city and get up and publicly give over what they heard by the Rebbe in Lubavitch, which means he did two things. One thing was to prevent the conflict with the opponents, and the second thing was to publicize Hasidus in a way that was never known before. If every single person, wherever they go, has to get up there and give over what they heard in Hasidic teaching, it'll be exposed in a way that was never exposed before. The end result was that the first year when he became Rebbe, not only they didn't succeed in breaking the Hasidic movement, but 15,000 new people became Hasidim. And the second year, many thousands more became Hasidim, and so it continued. So through his lifetime, in his 14 short years of leadership, Hasidus grew by leaps and bounds in numbers, and also in the amount of Hasidus that he published by saying so many Maimorim and for so many hours. And in fact, it's considered that generation were the deepest minds of Hasidus, the generation of the Mittel Rebbe. And story that I told in the other class was that there was a certain Chassid whose name was Rabbi Majeski of Yassi, a place in Romania. He was a Chassid of the Mittel Rebbe, and he was a young man. He did what the Mittel Rebbe told him to do. He would stop off in every city and give over what he learned about Hasidus. But one place where he stopped off was in a city which the leader in that city was a Rebbe, a Hasidic Rebbe, actually a student of the Maggid Mizrich. His name was the Apter Rov. And he was one of those Hasidic masters that was against revealing Hasidus the way Chabad reveals Hasidus. He believed you have to study Hasidus, but just sort of in a teaspoon, and not study it in depth. And the Mittel Rebbe was even more sort of Hasidus than the Alter Rebbe, revealing more. So he was in his shul, and he was giving over what he heard. And this Rebbe walked in, and he was in shock, because it's his shul, and you're coming into my shul, and you're teaching something which goes against my teachings. And he pronounced a curse on this person that he shouldn't live to the end of the year. I know, he's every time you hear the stories, I'm like, why would he do that? And the only thing that I can think of is, like I said to the other girls, I think there's a halacha in Torah that if a person is disrespectful to a king, then he forfeits his life. That's the halacha. And being that he was the Rebbe in that city, he was the king there, therefore he felt that according to halacha, that's what he deserved. Now this chassid knew that a curse that's pronounced by a tzaddik like that is pretty serious. So he went right back to the Mittel Rebbe instead of going home, and he told him what happened, and he was asking for a bracha that he should cancel whatever that person said. And the Mittel Rebbe asked him, did anything else happen? Which means, did you sort of answer back? Did you say something which was disrespectful? Did you do anything else sort of that was negative? He said, no, I didn't say a word. All I did was say Hasidus. And the only reason I did it because I didn't know that he was the one who was in that city. So the Mittel Rebbe paused for a moment and thought, and then he gave him a bracha and he said to him, you will outlive him. So the chassid said to the Mittel Rebbe, he's an old man, and please give me a better bracha than that. So then he told him, you'll outlive his children. So he said, Rebbe, his children also are not young, please give me a better bracha than that. Then they said, you'll outlive his grandchildren. And this chassid lived to the age of 104. Until the last day of his life, he was fully active, healthy, mind and body, and soul and mind. And it was all in the merit of the fact that he was such a big chassid of the Alter Rebbe, of the Mittel Rebbe. He was actually chassid of the father, the Alter Rebbe, and the Mittel Rebbe. What's the story with the arrest? So again, because these chassidim, not the chassidim, the opponents of chassidus believed that this was a movement that's undermining Yiddishkeit. So they felt that they have the right to do everything and anything in order to stop them. So they did the same to the Alter Rebbe. They had the Alter Rebbe arrested. And by the way, the arrest, if you know the details, was not just, it passed a red light, a very serious accusations. How did they manage to do that? So the answer is as follows, which I didn't explain in the other class, and that is that the Alter Rebbe had a plan because Hasidim was so being persecuted like that. There were a group of Hasidic Rebbes that decided they're leaving Europe and they're going to Israel because the Hasidim were being, everything they did was undermined. There were people who had businesses, they had stores, and they boycotted them. They had to close down their business. They weren't, they were looked down upon. People tried to hit them. It was very difficult to live as a Hasid. So a group of Hasidic Rebbes decided that they're relocating and they're going to Israel. And the Alter Rebbe was part of that group as well. So they went on a big trip to Israel. But on the way, the Alter Rebbe thought about it again. And he also consulted with one of the Rebbes who was going. His name was Reb Mendel of Horodok, very big tzaddik. And he was a student of the Maggid. And the Alter Rebbe accepted him to some extent as a Rebbe after the Maggid passed. And he just consulted with him once again, should he really go or not? We don't know what the discussion was and what we know what they decided. The Alter Rebbe decided he's going back home. And what did he do? He said that he's going to have Mesiras Nefesh. He's ready to go through all the difficulties and spread Hasidus all over Europe. And that's in fact the reason why he was the target, because he was the most proactive, the most aggressive in spreading Hasidus. However, the other Rebbes who went to Israel in those days was desolate. I mean, there was nothing going on there. Whoever lived there was very poor. And the Alter Rebbe said that he's taking upon himself to help support all the families that went to Israel. And he took that upon himself. Not only took it upon himself, he had Hasidim who he sent as shluchim every month or so to visit Hasidim all over and collect money, and then he would send that money to Israel. And this is what we know today as a tzedakah called Kol Chabad, and it's a custom of every Hasidic home that a woman and men give tzedakah to that pushka before candle lighting. It's specifically money to help support those who live in Israel. So Israel at that time was under the rule of Turkey. Turkey and Russia didn't get along and they're border with each other. So their accusation was that the Alter Rebbe is sending hundreds of thousands of ruble to Turkey. Why would he do that? So they said because they're planning a secret attack on Russia. They're helping build up a strong army in Turkey and then attack Russia, overthrow the Tsar. So you can imagine what that kind of accusation could cause. Now the Mitzvah Rebbe did the same. In fact, the Mitzvah Rebbe did even more. The Mitzvah Rebbe established a Chabad, before there wasn't a Chabad community. He established a Chabad community in Hebron, and he sent money, also the same thing, collected money from the Hasidim, ascended that community. His own daughter was one of the people that went there. So again, they used the same tactic. They said that they're sending money to Turkey, and the purpose is in order to strengthen the Turkish army to eventually overthrow the Russian army and overthrow Russia, the Tsar. And they even said that he plans to become a king himself. In fact, they said that his shul is the same measurements as the Beis Hamikdash. He's planning to build the Beis Hamikdash and become a king. So one of the things actually that happened when they arrested the Mitzvah Rebbe was they came to measure the shul. And they found that the measurements of the shul were not the same measurements of the Beis Hamikdash. They already saw that there's some lies over here. But that's what happened. He was arrested. Now, the good news was that when the Mitzvah Rebbe was arrested, it wasn't as severe as the Alter Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe was arrested, he was arrested by soldiers that came, high officers came, but they also sent to pick him up with this black wagon. That's what it's called in Russia, the Schwarze Wagen, which means a black wagon. What does a black wagon mean? This was specifically for people that were being accused of treason or anything which is very, very sensitive. And in most cases, people knew if anyone is arrested in this black wagon, it's a one-way trip. That's why it was such a miracle. The Mitzvah Rebbe went to jail in a much more respectful way. The Hasidim actually had a connection. They sent a delegation And they asked that even if he goes to the jail, it should be in a respectful way. And they granted it. So he wasn't going under, the guards that had to be there with swords, and he went there with his chassidim. It was actually a long parade of chassidim. Thousands of chassidim were walking with him as he was riding in this coach to go. He didn't go to Petersburg like the Alter Rebbe. He went to a different city called Vitebsk. He went to Vitebsk. That's where he was. And it was the person who was in charge of that region that had to be judged by that person. And even in the jail, they didn't go to a jail. They managed to succeed in arranging that he'd be in a house, but the house would be like a jail. People would be surrounded by soldiers. No one can go in, no one can go out. But it's not a jail as a regular jail. And he also allowed him, because of his health, that his son could be there with him. So he wasn't there by himself. And the first few days that he was there, they actually didn't know what was happening. They brought food, and they took out the dishes from the day before, but they didn't know what exactly was going on with the Mittler Rebbe in terms of his status. So eventually, the good news was that this person who was he was the doctor of the Mittler Rebbe. He was also a doctor of a lot of the people in the royal family in Vitebsk and other places. And he came to them with a request. And he said the Mittler Rebbe, for him, his health is a poor health. And for him to teach Chassidus, he thrives on that. And if he doesn't teach Chassidus, he physically becomes weak. To him, Chassidus is like food. And therefore, they should allow him to say Chassidus is Chassidim. So even though he was in jail, and even though he's in jail because of his position as a Hasidic leader, as a result of that, they allowed him that 3 times a week, he could say a Maimer Chassidus, and they allowed 50 Chassidim to come in and hear it from him. And they also allowed him to have a minyan to daven 3 times a day, Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. So that was a big relief that they had that. Now, one of the ways that they also managed to sort of enhance their false accusation was that the Mittler Rebbe, he was the first one to settle in the city of Lubavitch. Before that, the Hasidim lived with his father in a different city called Ladi. But then the war broke out between Russia and France, and the Alter Rebbe ran away during the war. And in fact, he had to run from one place to the next because Napoleon knew about him, and Napoleon wanted to capture him, and even who knows what else. So the Alter Rebbe was constantly running away. And that's another story which we'll talk about when it comes to Yitzhak Kislev, which is about a week and a half from now, how the Napoleon knew that the Alter Rebbe was in some way assisting the Tsar. So the Alter Rebbe was not able to rest anyway. He went from one city to another city to another city, and eventually that led to his passing because he was traveling during the winter, Russian cold winter, and he got sick and he passed away. So when he passed away, the Hasidim didn't have a city where to live. But just at that time, the Alter Rebbe had sent them to look for a place where they could relocate. And the Mittler Rebbe was in a city called Kremenchuk, which is actually not in Russia, it's in Ukraine. And and during that time, there was a question, where should they actually settle? So Hasidim came from different cities, from White Russia and from Lithuania, asking the Alter Rebbe to settle in their cities. At the end, the Alter Rebbe chose the city Lubavitch, which was in White Russia, at the time at least. And the Alter Rebbe, and during this time, because they were on the run from the war, all the Hasidim who went with the Alter Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe's family, everybody had lost all their possession. It's tremendous poverty. So the Hasidim collected money, funds to help support all these families. And there was one chassid, he was in charge. His name was Reb Pinchas Reizes. And the Mittler Rebbe told him that he sent him a letter, And he said, I heard that you collected 3,000 or 4,000 ruble. So I want you to take another person with you, the two of you together, distribute the money to the different families. I just have to show you what that looks like. In writing. In the letter it said, Gimel, this is a Gimel, Ruble, this is the Hebrew for Ruble. No, missed the word. Gimel Alafim, this is 1,000, 3,000 ruble. Alafim, 3,000 ruble. Actually, it was either 3 or 4, that was not clear. So, this person who he sent the letter to was a big chassid, passed away, he had no children. So one of his relatives inherited everything. And he also inherited the batch of letters. He found this letter. And when he saw that he collected 3,000 or 4,000 ruble, he wrote to Mittel Rebbe that I want to have a part of this money. And Mittel Rebbe wrote back to him, what connection do you have to this money? It was meant for the families that were poor. And he said, if you don't give me the money, I'm going to get you into trouble. I will inform the government that you did something illegal. The Mittel Rebbe said to him, do whatever you want, but there's no, I don't owe you any money. And he actually did that. He got together with another person who was actually a relative of the Mittel Rebbe's family. And they did this. They took that letter and they added one letter, Kuf. When you add letter Kuf, it reads 103,000 ruble, which is an enormous amount of money. And they told the government, how is it possible a person's traveling from Kremenchuk to Lubavitch, which is not such a huge area, and they collected 103,000 rubles. It must be that this person has some underground connections because they're involved in this movement of overthrowing the Tsar. That was their basis. And on that basis, they arrested the Alter Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe. And again, even though it's all lies, but when a king is aware that someone's even thinking, or people say that he's thinking of overthrowing, they wouldn't think too much and just put away with the person. But over here, Baruch Hashem, there was the miracle that they were listening and they heard what the Mittel Rebbe had to say. And the Mittel Rebbe explained anything that of course, there were more things in their file, in their accusation. And eventually he was freed. And the day that he was freed was on Yud Kislev, the 10th of Kislev. I just want to give this out. Maybe some of you know this already, but I just want, if you don't mind. That is, yes.
This is a totally different subject, maybe for a different day.
Yeah.
But it really touches on this love your fellow Jew, and we obviously have much lesser issues like this, what they had to face. But it's just, it's like a challenge here in the story that these Jewish people did this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I know it's a whole other subject, but
yes.
It's just.
Rabbi Majeski, do you have any more visions?
I'm sorry, yeah. Yes, we will bring it up when we talk about the Alter Rebbe's arrest. I'll show you something Alter Rebbe wrote about that subject. So when the Mittel Rebbe was informed that he's going out of jail, when he was released, he was saying Tillim. And it's the 10th day of the month. So on the 10th day of the month, you say, by the way, this was the days before Chitas, because even though Chitas only started in 1927, but the Rebbes themselves were already very into saying the day, the Tillim of the day. And he was saying these words, Pada b'shalom nafshi mikravli. These are words of King David. He redeemed my soul in peace from battles against me because of the many who were with me. Basically, David HaMelech also had many enemies, and he said this pasuk. So as he said these words, he was informed that he's being released. And interesting, the same thing happened with the Alter Rebbe. He was saying to them, he was saying this chapter, this pasuk, and as he said this pasuk, before he finished it, that came in to tell him that you're free. The only question is, the Mitzvah Rebbe was saying it because it was the 10th of the month. But why was the Alter Rebbe saying it? He was released on the 19th. So I circled on top, if you notice, where it says Psalms for Tuesday, which means the Tillim is divided into two parts. It's divided by the day in 30 parts, and it's also divided by the week in 7 parts. There's a segment of Tillim for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it says that the Rebbes of Chabad ordinarily would only say the Tillim for the day. If there's any kind of crisis, they would also add and say the Tillim for the week. The Alter Rebbe was released on a Tuesday. So being that it was Tuesday, he was saying this part of Tillim. So he too was by the same words. As a result of this, Padav Shalom Nafshi, this pasuk became the symbol of the Alter Rebbe's release from jail, the Middle Rebbe release from jail, because this pasuk is what they were saying when they came out of jail. And not only that, but all the Maimarim of Chassidus, I can't say all, most of the Maimarim, for every single Rebbe, starting from the Alter Rebbe, the Middle Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, Frierdiker Rebbe, our Rebbe, most of the Maimarim start with these words and explain this pasuk of Shalom, because this is related to the release of the Middle Rebbe. And unfortunately, when the Middle Rebbe was even though he was out of jail, but they filed an appeal, and there was still concerns that he's going to go back to jail. So the Middle Rebbe at that time went to pray by the Ohel of his father, the Alter Rebbe. And on the way back home, he got very sick, and eventually that's when he passed away. And his passing away was another story, a lot of details. Already the clock is telling me that it's almost over. But I just mentioned the fact that he passed away and he was buried in a city called Nezhin. And one of the stories that are told about his passing was that the reason why he went to the Ohel was because there was a decree that started at that time by the Tsar, called the Kantonisten, which means that every family had to send a child, age 7 or 8, to join the Tsar's army. And the official excuse was that they want the army to have people that are trained since they're children, and they're going to be amazing soldiers. But the real reason was, it was really aimed at Jewish kids, and they wanted to use the opportunity to convert the Jewish children. And unfortunately, it was a very big tzara. Imagine a mother turns around and suddenly her child is gone. Someone snatched him away, took him to the army, and they knew that it was with the intention to convert them. So there was a very, very tragic time. It lasted for 25 years. But this is when it started. And the Mitzvah Rebbe went to the Oil, the Alter Rebbe, to daven, and asked that this decree should be nullified. And I think the way it's given over was that he was so aggravated and so pained by this decree that this is what led to him becoming sick, and that's what led to his passing. And the Mitzvah Rebbe, though, because his whole passion, his life was Chassidus, so the story is told about him, by the way, that he was so passionate about Chassidus that it was something which gave him life. And the story is told that in a week before he passed away, I think I told the story a little bit different before, but it was a week before he passed away that he started to feel so not good that he fainted. And after they brought him back to consciousness, he fainted. Again, every once in a while he would faint, and they had to bring him back to consciousness. But the doctors had told him that he needs peace and he shouldn't say Chassidus. But when this happened, one doctor said to the other doctor, you want to see something? Tell him that he has permission to say Chassidus, and you'll see that he'll become a different person. And that's what happened. He got up and he started to give over Chassidus. But the last moments before he passed away, that night, also a similar thing happened, that he fainted. There was a point where they even thought that he already passed away. And people were crying, and somebody from the family walked over and said, why are you doing this? Everybody's hysterical, wake up. And he opened his eyes, and he said, bring me my Shabbos clothes. They brought him his Shabbos clothes, and he said a mimer. He said actually 3 mimers that night, and he kept asking, "Is it dawn already?" And when they told him it was dawn, shortly after, he finished saying them. Didn't finish the mimer. It was the middle of saying the mimer, and the last words that came out of his mouth was the words "Ki imcha mekor chayim." The last word was chayim, which actually means life. The Tzemach Tzedek, his son-in-law, and the third Rebbe said that there hasn't been anyone who passed away in this way since the times that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, it says, before he passed away, he called the students together and he began to reveal secrets of Kabbalah that throughout his entire lifetime he didn't reveal. The whole house was surrounded by fire, and the whole place was lifted to a different spiritual realm completely. And he was revealing these deep secrets of Torah. And the last words that came out of his mouth was Kisham Tziva Hashem Esabracha Chaim. He stopped the middle of a sentence. And the last word that came out of his mouth was Chaim. And based on that, there's also a lot of sichas that draw a parallel between the Mittel Rebbe and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, how they were connected. In fact, one of the days of the year that to the Mittel Rebbe was very, very dear, and he was very, very involved with the Chassidim on that day, performed a lot of miracles on that day, was Lag BaOmer, the day that the Shimon Bar Yochai passed away. So these are the days that we're going to have tonight is Tes Kislev, and it's the day of the birth, the day of the passing, and Sunday is Yud Kislev. We don't say Tachron on Sunday, it's a Yontif, and it's the Yontif of Geulah. So we should take advantage of these days. It's the days that we give extra tzedakah, we learn a little bit more Chassidus, and we try to make good achlatas, and hopefully that will bring us to the ultimate Geulah. And once ascended, it would be nice to see the Mittel Rebbe. We don't even have a picture of the Mittel Rebbe, so it would be nice to have the Geulah and see what he looked like. They do say that he resembled his father very much, the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe's picture is 100,000% authentic. How do we know? I'll tell you about it some other time. A good Shabbos, yeah.
In the other class, you told us very well to get clarification where the onion. The Alter Rebbe that says the Chassid or the
Mittel Rebbe.
Mittel?
He was the one that said that wherever they go, they have to be Chassidus. And this person complained that it's giving him too much arrogance. Anyway, you'll ask the shluchas if you don't know to teach you the song of Father Mishalim. This is the season for Father Mishalim.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Back, I'm gonna just close and start.